Hello, and welcome to the Ecom Edge, where we introduce you to a variety of experts, practitioners, and strategists who can shed insights to e-commerce leaders on how they can better connect with their audiences and drive profitable growth. I'm your host, Diane Burley, Head of Content and Comms here at Coveo, and I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest. We recently conducted a survey of 4,000 consumers who worked, and in analyzing it, we started to see different behaviors from one cohort in particular. And in particular, we saw it around Generation Z. So we wanted to find out more about this rising cohort and how it may impact their expectations from both B2C and B2B companies. So we turned to the expert, Dr. Corey Seemiller, a longtime educator and a professor of leadership at Wright State University. She's been on the forefront of research on Generation Z and has authored not one, but 4 books on this fascinating generation. Corey, I'm so happy to have you join us.
Thanks, Diane. I'm excited to be here today talking about one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask, what got you so interested in this generation?
Well, my background is that I work in higher education. So I love college students, the students that are coming, particularly traditional age students that are coming into, their teens, into a young adulthood, and seeing them kind of emerge into the world as an independent being. And I've always been fascinated and interested in that. But it was back in 2013, actually, when I started to notice that the students that were coming to campus were just a little bit different than students I had seen before. And while I wasn't able to do a study back then to say, are you different? Being able to, now look back after I've done a number of studies, and I can see that what they were showing up as was really a part and parcel to the fact that they're just part of a different generational cohort who sees the world differently. And so I got excited about that. And I thought, if we're going to survive in higher education, if we're going to serve these students, then we need to understand who they are and how they see the world. So that started a journey that was, basically turning over one rock and then another rock. And now here I am many, many years later, and still just as fascinated, probably even more so with them.
Well, and we're both moms of Generation Z. I've got big Zs, and I think you've got little Zs. Maybe you can get into that a little bit.
I do. I have a little Z. She just turned 13 the other day. So that's a whole other thing I got to talk about it. Not just that she's a little Z, but she's 13. It's funny because sometimes I go and I do, engagements and things, and she'll come with me. And so I always say, I brought a little bit of collateral to show you, here, I thought I was supposed to bring a Gen Zer. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? And, everybody usually laughs. But I always say that I have this kind of interesting, viewpoint because, I study them. This generation, I teach this generation and work with this generation, and then I parent. And so I have this sort of trifecta of seeing the research come alive in my day-to-day. And my little Z, she does things that I'm like, I could have called that. I knew that was coming. I know why you're doing that. So it is it is insightful and helpful in parenting.
It's and there's I always feel like we have to do a caveat here when you're talking about looking at an entire generation, that this is because they're generalizations, right, about a generation, and so I know you're very sensitive to that as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think that's an important factor when I'm doing a lot of times talking or even writing about generational research is talking about how this is more of a cohort model, right? You look at people born in a certain time period and they experience, current events and life experiences that are really specific to an age period. So you think about something like COVID, right? We're all going through it. It's something we can all experience. But as somebody who is a Gen Xer, I'm experiencing it very differently than my Gen Z daughter. I never had to go to school on Zoom. I never had to miss out on my graduation, her 5th grade graduation, and think about high schoolers. So what happens between ages about 14 and 24 has a profound impact on how you see and navigate the world for the rest of your lives. And, we've had sociologists doing research on this for decades about how what happens in those formative years sticks with the way you behave. And so while they're generalizations, because not everybody fits it, there are trends. And that's important. So, we're going to come out of this in 30, 40 years with this generation saying, pretty much all of them saying, I remember what it was like to go to school online. And so that's kind of an interesting thing when we look at it from the cohort model.
So this podcast is really geared toward B2C, although there is B2B involved, e-commerce, or people that are interested in hearing it too. How do they need to start thinking of this cohort, and it's a rising cohort for them, right? They're starting to shop. They're shopping more. Your daughter she's probably influencing things around your house, but she's not really a digital buyer yet, I don't think. But what advice do you give to marketers who have just probably finally started figuring out the millennials, and now they've got Generation Z?
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. As whenever we're looking at one generation, it's always good to look at the generation sort of that came before. And, because a lot of times we think that we're just going to keep doing the same thing. And, as millennials, we're out shopping and, purchasing experiences rather than items, and having, like online shopping and coupons and, saving money here and there and all of that. The assumption was that Gen Z was going to just be more of the same. And it's not just in the shopping and the money spending, it's everything. Everyone has this assumption. I keep talking to people, oh, they're just like super millennials. And they're not. And so as we look at things like, particularly around their perceptions of money, I think this is important, is they're a saving generation. There's been a lot of references to them as the recession babies, kind of born on around, the time of the recession, or at least we're growing up as little kids, and the saving mentality. I'm going to just save it for a rainy day. And, and then a lot of people are saying, well, you're like 6. What kind of rainy day could you possibly have? And then, and then all of a sudden it's like, we have COVID and there's a rainy day. And like all of a sudden these kids are now seeing that there really are rainy days. I really do need to put my money aside, and I need to be really mindful about having that backup plan. We just had a study that we just completed in the fall. We had over 30,000 participants from around the world, from 32 different countries. And we asked them about their pandemic spending behavior. And they said that basically the number one thing they did was sock money away the best that they could. And so it's, so when we're talking about people who are, looking at buying things, what is the message we're telling them about why they should spend that money out of their piggy banks when you have this generation that's holding very, very tightly onto their savings in ways we haven't seen since the GI generation?
It's interesting, though. We found something very similar with our research. But one of the things that we surfaced is that 53% of Gen Z said they would pay more to receive more tailored recommendations when they are out shopping. Does that surprise you?
Well, it doesn't, because just because they want to save money doesn't mean that they don't want to be mindful about spending it. Mm-hmm. And, some of that's a misnomer, is that they won't spend it at all. But they're kind of the view that if I'm going to get something, I'm going to get exactly what I want with my money. And so that doesn't surprise me whatsoever. If they want, particularly 2 things. One is they're willing to pay more for something if it's more so what they want. But secondly, the tailored and customizing experience. This is part and parcel of their authenticity, about being able to be themselves and show up in ways that are, who I am, and I'm an individual and I want something that's specific to me. So that also aligns in the fact that they'd be looking for that kind of an experience.
Well, and they're true digital natives, right? So they really are not going to put up with lousy websites. And this goes into their professional lives too. Both my big Zs are now in the workforce, and you should hear them critique the systems they have to work on at work. They're like, what is this? It's so crazy,
Yes.
So they're not going to. So one of the things that we also found is that they don't suffer bad websites. They leave. And that was one of the things that also came up, is that if they could find things better, they also saw value in that versus having to sift through all the flotsam and jetsam that can be on some sites.
Yeah, and we found that in not particularly related specific to, commerce websites or, where they're online shopping or anything, but more so in general, is that they have a decreased attention span from kids even 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and they want to be able to get in and get out and get things quickly. And so if they are going to a clunky website where they're having to click and click and they can't find what they need and they can't search and they don't have a mobile app or whatever the case may be, they're not going to want to spend time with it. That makes sense pretty much in every area of their lives. If they want it to be quick, easy, and seamless, and if it isn't, they'll move on. And the reality is that they're incredibly informed. They're not just digitally savvy, but their information, they're overflowing with information. So they know that isn't the only place that they can go get what they want. So unlike someone like me who grew up without the internet, I might think that this is the only place I can shop to get this. I'm going to put up with X, Y, Z. For them, they say, nope, I'll just jump back on and find 15 other places I can go to get exactly what I need. I'm not going to deal with this.
Does that mean there's no loyalty to brands?
That's so interesting. The loyalty does come from something different. It's the loyalty is, what we've kind of found is and we also collate a lot of research too from other people in addition to the research we do. And, a lot of things are pointing to loyalty not being about the product, but loyalty being about the company and the company's values. And so this has come up over and over in our study, is that there are two values that the vast majority are not willing to budge on. And one of those is policies and procedures and things that have to do with inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. Is this a company that is, supporting and welcoming all people and is not donating money to, policies that, discriminate? That's a huge thing. And the second one is environmental policies. And, of course, these aren't like earth shattering. It's not surprising, but the research does continue to tell us this. It's not just do they donate money to some, recycling fund, but are they actually checking on supply chains and making sure that, things are done, environmentally consciously with human rights in mind? And once they will find companies that they believe in, they will continue to buy products from them. As opposed to saying, oh, I'm very loyal to this exact product. It's great if they can do that too, but they'll walk away from companies that don't have the values that align with them. And those are two that just tend to be very, very strong values for Gen Z, but it's also an individual thing. If an individual Gen Zer really believes in some particular, social concern, then they will find a company that aligns with that and is very upfront about that, and they will buy products from them.
It's funny. I was thinking about, I come out of newspapers originally. That was where I started my career. And, many, many, many years ago, probably nobody listening is going to remember this, but there used to be the women's pages in a newspaper, the women's section. And, newspapers changed as generations shifted and cultures shifted and more women went into the workforce. And papers quietly got rid of the women's section and just called it, lifestyle or whatever that they termed it as. Are we going to see generational shifts like that in merchandising? You mentioned some of the social changes, some of the inclusion. Are we going to start seeing different categorizations of, let's say, apparel, things that might have been very much defined by gender? Is that going to now blend a little bit more?
Well, I think in some ways there are some in the generation that think that it should. But in reality, the people who are still making a men's section and a women's section in a department store are nowhere, in many cases, nowhere near blending those. But I think, if we look 30 years down the road, it wouldn't surprise me at all as this generation ages that they start finding, things that are much more gender neutral, crossover, blended gender areas, especially with clothing. This is a very divisive, can be very divisive. Why do I have to go shop in the men's section to get this? Why do I have to go? I don't want to go to the women's section if I identify as a man. When there's just a lot of kind of, more gender neutral clothing. And so I do see that as being something that that this generation, many in this generation would probably move towards supporting. But until they are somehow in charge of how that is laid out kind of systemically, because it's not just changing one store, you're changing the entire culture of shopping. Do I think this generation can do that? I'm not sure, but I think that they're at least opening up the conversations for why do we have this system set up like this.
So how else might they be different from their parents' and grandparents' generation, not just for technological awareness, but by other cultural factors?
Well, it's interesting because when you start laying all the generations out, you see that, Gen Z is different than, one generation on one factor, but is very similar to another generation on another. So it isn't even that, for instance, Gen Z is just different than all the previous generations that have come before them. We found that there's actually quite a bit of similarities between the GI generation and Generation Z. So GI generation would be like the great grandparents of Gen Z. And so, we do find some things where they both, kind of are the depression babies versus the recession babies, and some of the same kinds of behaviors we're seeing. And, to what extent, that the cultural norms at the time played into it. But so we do see that maybe there's some similarity there. But then when you start comparing things like, baby boomer and a Gen Z or on another scale, you're going to find something different. So it's interesting. It really depends on what you're looking for. Like Gen Zers are very similar to millennials when it comes to kind of open-mindedness and, tech savviness, but they're really different on the way that they engage with people and the way that they learn. And, so millennials like to, be in these cohorts and groups and pods and shared workspaces, and Gen Z is like, absolutely not. I want to do my own thing, and if I want to talk to you, I'll talk to you. So there's connection with every generation on different factors, and there's disconnection too. So we find a lot of similarities between Gen X and Gen Z, primarily because Gen X are the primary parent generation of Gen Z, so they're raising them to be more independent, autonomous, and some of the things that what the quote latchkey generation was all about. And so that's where we see some of these similarities and differences. So I think what's the most important thing is to realize, particularly, is that there are things that we have learned about other generations that work with them that will also work with Gen Z. We just need to know where those similarities are. The same things that are, it's important for Gen Zers to shop at places with values that they believe in and open-mindedness. It's important for millennials to do that too. That's an important thing. So we can learn from who has come before. We're not totally at a loss, like there's a new generation. We don't know what we're doing. Really kind of saying, all right, where is that crossover and how can we capitalize on that? And then also being open to the fact that maybe there are a couple nuances about Gen Z that, I'd probably venture to say that if you want to do some advertising using something like TikTok, you probably aren't going to look to the baby boomer generation or Gen X and say, how was TikTok for you? And, they're going to say, I don't even know what TikTok is. It's two-part in that sense. Let's learn from what has worked from people before us, before them, but also let's be open to kind of the nuances of what's coming about now that only this generation would have experienced.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how you attract the Generation Z. How do you get them to take notice of your brand? What are you? Because it's got to be a little bit different, right? They're a little more suspicious of corporate messaging and things like that.
Well, they're also a lot more informed. So those fancy commercials that that was with some jingle or some funny thing, they can see right through that stuff. Because they have the ability to just look up information or read the news and say, wow, this company was involved in some type of scandal, or this, they can read about them. And that's what's really different about them, and not necessarily them per se, but the fact that they're growing up in a time in which that information is accessible. So so in that sense, how do they get attracted? Through honesty and transparency. Think about it. There's a company who messed up, and instead of trying to hide it, cover it up, put a fancy commercial out, do something, just ignore it and blow it off and hope people don't notice it. Gen Z wants you to say, hey, we learned from this. We're doing better. We've decided to embrace this new cause because we realized we weren't doing what we needed to do for our people. Or, I'm going to be interested to see how things kind of fall through with, companies that might have supported or not supported a particular law and then get called out by their consumers. Why didn't you do that? And then those that come forward and make excuses versus those that come forward and say, you're right, we didn't step up in time. And Gen Z just wants that transparency. They want to know that they're going to be paying into and supporting a company that aligns with what they believe and that will be accountable when they make mistakes.
So one of the other findings we found that was rather intriguing and on the surface seems contradictory, but I think you're going to have an interesting answer to it. We found that this generation likes social media, looks for social media recommendations before they buy, but they don't like Amazon. They'd like to steer away from Amazon because they don't trust those reviews. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't at all, actually. And I'd be curious to see which reviews and things that they do like on social media. It's going to be from the people that are in their inner circles.
It's their inner circle.
Yeah.
Is that what that's
Yep.
That's what I figured you were.
Exactly. It's the people closest to them. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest, there's two big entities that are the most influential in their decision making. Number one with being parents, number two being peers. So when asked if they are interested, influenced by things like celebrities, politicians, or professional athletes, they're like, no, not at all. And that's because they trust who they know. And so I can understand why getting on somewhere like an Amazon and seeing just a random review or 7 is not going to do it for them. And I always make the joke, like they could get on Yelp and find a restaurant that has 500 5-star reviews, and the restaurant says, no, they have terrible burgers. And they're like, okay, I won't go. And because they put so much more weight in the people that know them.
That should make parents feel, you're making me feel good that my recommendation to my kids is actually meaningful, huh?
It is. Well, it's funny too, because
that's a generational difference.
It is. It's funny because Gen Z, asks their parents for a lot of advice about things, particularly around like money, career decisions. But I was surprised to find that they also ask their parents about, or at least listen to their advice about things like dating and relationships. And I thought I would have died first than to ask my mom about dating when I was in high school. And so, but this generation really looks to those people that are in their close circles because they know that they can trust them with that advice.
Well, word of mouth has always been a very strong influencer for sales, and marketers probably would do well if they would encourage this word of mouth. I mean, maybe there's promotional ideas that they could be doing to get this group of young people to promote products with their friends. I mean, it has to be genuine, obviously, but do you think there'll be more incentives to do such things?
It'll be interesting to see. I think once we get to a point where, you say, oh, well, you get a $20 credit on your account if you sign up a friend. I don't think that would work because I think people can see right through that. But I do think, if there's a way to do promotions that are more engaging, like, if it's a restaurant, it's like, you've been to this restaurant, bring 3 people who haven't been to this restaurant before, and just, make it more like a, kind of an event rather than you get a coupon or you get something for it. Because I think that that's where that authenticity comes in. I mean, nobody wants to say, well, you're bringing me to this restaurant because you're getting a kickback. That doesn't feel like that authentic advice. But I do think that there's room for really, really encouraging the word of mouth. See, this is the thing, is that the word of mouth works. We all know this from experience. It works the best when someone really loves and believes in the product, and they love and believe in the company. You talk to people who are diehard Apple users, right? You don't have to give them any kind of discount because, Apple doesn't give a discount for anything. But if you're a diehard Apple user, you're going to go around basically telling everyone who doesn't have an iPhone that they should get an iPhone. How did Apple do that? How did Apple make it so that you become so diehard loyal to this brand and you're not getting anything back from it? And I just had someone I know replaced her phone and she switched over to an iPhone because I was going on and on about how much I liked it. I think, and I think that that's the thing. How do you get people to feel so strongly and feel so good about their own purchase that they're willing to do that without the company having to intervene? Like in this case, Apple didn't ask me to or give me any incentive to do that. So how do you create that? And I think that's where you're going to get particularly Gen Z.
It's funny. I just bought a new Frigidaire stove. It's an induction stove with the oven has the air fryer built into, and I love this thing. I mean, I'll give demos all day long on it. I just go on and on and on about this stove. But I'm hearing my kids say, "I can't wait to see it. Maybe I'll get one too."
Right.
We love to cook in our house, so that's. But I never dawned on me that I was actually influencing them until I was reading some of the things that you were publishing. So I found that fascinating because when they do ask me for my opinion, I sort of get this, wow, they're asking me. But now you're telling me this is actually very normal. I should probably just relax now.
Right, exactly. And they're listening to you even when they're not asking for your opinion and you happen to say something and they might even sort of dismiss it. Oh, they're remembering. They might say, oh, my mom said this. And you're like, wow, wait a minute. Hold on a second.
Right. And I just thought they were, looking for a loan or something. They wanted money. And that's why they were paying attention so closely. Well, communication. How is communication different with this group?
Well, this continues to be a very, very interesting finding, is that they love face-to-face communication. Love it. That's that personal.
Is that because they were locked in their house for 2 years?
Right. It's funny though. This was actually a research finding that came up pre-COVID, and it came up just as strongly post-COVID.
Wow.
And it was, I would rather talk in person. And I always joked about it that, right around 2013 or so, 2014, that kind of time period, I was, I would teach and I had office hours. Students never came to my office hours. Are you kidding me? They would die first than to show up at their faculty members' office hours. All of a sudden, I started getting students just showing up, and they'd stand in my doorway and say, hi. And I'm like, hi, can I help you? And they're like, I just wanted to check in, and I'm like, well, okay, do you have a reason? And they just wanted to have that connection. And of course, now with COVID, and things being online, it's a little bit different. But I have said this jokingly to people, and I've had people all over the U.S. saying the same thing. Like my Gen Z employee will just stop by, or my student will just want to just connect with me. And so they like the in-person stuff. And it's kind of shocking because you think, well, wait a minute, hold on. They've always got their heads down. They're buried in their phones. They're, Snapchatting each other, and, they're texting and messaging. I don't get it. Well, the reality is that a lot of them say the reason I do that is because everybody else is doing it. And if I'm sitting around with a group of friends and everybody's got their heads buried in their phones, then I'm just going to pull my phone out too, because I don't want to just sit here. So we end up not talking to each other. So it's not that they do face to face. In some cases they do, like I mentioned, but a lot of them want it and aren't getting it. So they like that FaceTime. They like that connection. They don't communicate over email. They don't like that. They say that's a Gen X thing. Gen X is basically, they say Gen X is keeping email and LinkedIn in business, because we are just super fans of both of those kind of platforms. And they said we're not really interested in Gen X. They're getting more interested in LinkedIn, but they're not interested in email. But and they don't like the phone. It's interesting for a generation that likes face to face. They're not really fans of the phone. And part of that is they said that they don't like being trapped in a conversation that they can't easily get out of, and they feel rude just like hanging up. So, which I think is interesting, because if you're face to face, it's even harder, or you get trapped in a conversation. So really the bottom line is that, they have different modalities, but they're pretty certain about the ones that they don't like.
Do they like to shop? I never was a shopper, but I know people that love to shop. They love to go out and they just love to spend the day shopping. Do they like to shop, or do they want to do, are they purposed? Do they go out to buy?
Well, I don't really have the specific data on that, but I can tell you other adjacent data that will help make some sense of that. They're busy. They're very busy, especially the younger ones. They work more hours per week than their older generations did when they were the same age. They have a lot going on, and they are trying to get things done. They try to multitask, and so they're not necessarily out like just maybe shopping, although a lot of them are talking about how they like to go to the mall, but more so because that's a place that they can go, as opposed to what they can do there. So I'm not sure that
do malls still exist.
Yeah, we have a couple here. I know it's like every time I go, there's one less store, but yeah, so they like going to places like that as a meeting space, but I'm not sure that they're going there to just shop for the day. They're very purposeful, or they might go into a place, find something they like, literally walk out of the store and get online and buy it online from someone else.
I know you talk to marketers a lot. What is the chief concern that many of them are facing? What is the question that comes up to you over and over again?
How do we get them to buy from us? Really, they say, what's going to differentiate us? Are we doing the right thing? And a lot of them are struggling with trying to kind of spitball. We're going to throw this out. We're going to do this new campaign, and then we're going to have a loyalty program, and then we're going to, and I think part of it is this idea of trying to just be informed and narrow it down into a couple of really solid approaches. We know there's a few things that work. We know that, being transparent works with this generation. We know that being values aligned with them and things that matter works for this generation. We also know that getting a good value, meaning getting a good product for a reasonable price, matters to this generation. But there's a lot of them that are like trying to do, all sorts of things that, and again, they're just trying things out, which is fine. But I get asked a lot, like, what exactly is going to work? And I say, well, there's just a handful of things I know that align. But the actual marketing campaigns themselves, I don't know what will work. But if you can align some of these things, you're on the right path. And it really comes back down to values alignment with who they are as a company.
I know it's a little bit hard to do this because Generation Alpha, which is, I guess, is the next one that's coming up. Do you see this as a cycle? Where you said this group is probably more like their grandparents' generation or great grandparents in terms of more of depression type personalities. Does that mean that the next generation will be more like the boomers?
It's really hard to tell at this point because they're so young. Obviously right now they look very much like little tiny Gen Zers because they're living within the same time period. It'll be interesting to see. We'll want to keep an eye out on a couple things to see what's going to shape them. because particularly, as I mentioned, the what happens between 14 and 24 is really telling. And as we see with Gen Z and the GI generation, there's so many similarities about what was happening in the world at that time when they were those ages. So it'll be interesting when we see Gen Alpha get to those ages 14 to 24, what was happening in the world, and is there another generation that had some similar experiences to that, whether it's political, technological revolution, globalization, it could be war, it could be any number of things. I mean, we had no idea the pandemic was, on the horizon. And so whatever happens during that time period, it will be informative to go back and say, okay, did other generations experience something similar, and can we learn from them?
I know that one of the areas of research you were doing, or you were pulling out a little bit more of the personality types, and you mentioned in your research, I read that they're more artistic, they're entrepreneurial, and I can't remember the third. Is it they want to innovate? Is that what it was? That the third?
Yeah, it wasn't artistic. It was actually that they're innovative and entrepreneurial are like the two big ones. The creativity one is creativity is kind of a hit or miss. Some of them are creative when it comes to being innovative, but they're not necessarily creative when it comes to being artistic. And a lot of that too has to do with some of them growing up, especially the big Z's, where they had less access to kind of art classes and things that were being cut in schools, to make room for standardized testing. I mean, you can track that back. And so a lot of them have come out less kind of artistic, like physically artistic. But as far as being kind of innovative, they, and entrepreneurial is, they keep, the kind of the mantra is, we're not going to wait for grownups to do this because they had a chance and they haven't. And that came through on one of our studies a couple of years ago, so loud and clear that it was, we're going to have to do all these things. We're going to have to start all these businesses. We're going to have to, create and invent all these things because they need to be done and older people aren't doing them. And it wasn't a blame game. It was more just like, they've done a lot. They've moved us forward. It's our turn to keep us moving. So it's interesting when you see so many of these like little startups, and you see that have turned into even big startups and inventions from kids that are 8 years old, 9 years old, that have just gone on. And all of them are really to solve some kind of a social issue. They're not necessarily, I've invented this for fame and fortune. It's a new flavored popcorn and yay, it's exciting. And I'm going to be on the front of a magazine. No, it's things like, I'm finding a cure for a disease, or I'm finding out how to save energy with this new device, or because they see that it's their responsibility to go on and address these social issues. So that's why you're seeing these kind of entrepreneurial and innovative things coming from them. And at least it's a mindset. They might not ever invent anything, and they might not ever be entrepreneurs, but it's that mindset that we as a generation need to do something, and we're going to start now.
Your daughter and you talk about entrepreneurship. She's got a little business, right?
She actually, well, she's doesn't have a business, but she has a book on Amazon. And then she worked.
Didn't we all at
exactly.
What was she? How old was she when she wrote that?
She was 8. We wrote a book together, and then she illustrated it, and we wrote the storyline, and then I actually wrote it into something that was relatively coherent, and we published it on Amazon, and so she does book signings and stuff. And part of it is that we have the resources to be able to do that now that I couldn't do that as a kid. But she was really interested in that, and so she's constantly like finding ways to, kind of put herself out there, and I think that's really cool. And looking around at like even her friends that are entrepreneurial, they're like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast, and I'm going to, I'm going to have my own YouTube channel and be an influencer, and I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And so it's really kind of a fun thing to see, especially on a day-to-day with my own kid.
That sounds like fun. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This has been terrific. If our listeners are going to walk away with one big piece of advice about this cohort and trying to market to them, what is it? I think I can guess what you're going to say, but I'll let you have the final thought.
This generation is really values driven. They're absolutely values driven. They want honesty, transparency. They want you to support diversity, equity, inclusion. They want environmental, policies and practices that align with saving the planet. And they want not only for a company to have that, they want to have that company share that. They want to be able to easily find that, know that, feel that, and be that loyalist to say, I'm going to be a part of something bigger. And by shopping with you, I can do that.
Sounds great. Corey Seemiller, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you come back.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. To hear more, subscribe to the Ecom Edge podcast today. Listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.